What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Star Wars, The Clone Wars, the series. So The Clone Wars, if you have not seen my review for the film that launched this series, definitely go back and check out my review for that. But if you have seen that review, you know that I enjoyed that film for what it was, but it definitely felt like a commercial for the series. I go back and watch it. It's a lot more silly, a lot more just cheesy. It's kind of all over the place. It feels like multiple episodes put together in one. Though there are really awesome elements about this, and as a deep, just over-the-top Star Wars fan that I am, there's so much there that's for me, and I really enjoy the connection between Anakin and Ahsoka, or at least the meeting of them in that film. Yeah, a lot about that film is definitely not like fantastic, and I don't think it really represents how good the show gets over seasons. And so yeah, now we're going to be talking about the Clone Wars series. I wanted to do a separate video for the actual TV series that was spawned off of that movie, and what I can say right out of the gate is similar to that movie is that the first season is a little on the cheesier, more kid side. Now it's definitely light years better than that movie, and I think because they were able to do episode by episode, and each episode of this series is about 20 minutes or so, they were able to really just do these little fun adventures. So across that first season, you do have a lot of really cool episodes that just kind of show us a different side of what's going on in the Clone Wars, seeing some fun adventures with these characters, and really expanding upon what we were introduced to in that first movie. However, I do feel like I should say that that first season is a little bit more on the silly side of things. Now, Star Wars has always been silly and always had silly elements in it, though there are darker installments and things that dive deeper into the lore. I think that first season is a little bit more on the silly side. It has a lot more just fun adventure episodes that don't really play into the huge plot. And somebody like myself who's a huge diehard Star Wars fan and just enjoys seeing Star Wars, there is a lot there for me in that first season. There's a lot between the characters that I really enjoy. You can tell that they were kind of using it almost like a testing ground. They were just making these fun Star Wars adventures. So yeah, the first season for me of this show is definitely a good time. As a Star Wars fan, there's definitely a lot there for me. However, I think objectively I could say it definitely doesn't play super heavy into the overall narrative. It feels like a good way for you to kind of get a feel of the show and kind of the characters, Ahsoka, and just the connections and the way the show is going to feel. However, what I'll say is really awesome is the jump between season 1 and season 2 is pretty drastic. The animation change from the last episode of the first season up to the first episode of the second season is pretty noticeable. Between the animation change, the story structure, just the way the show feels, looks, it definitely is obviously still in the spirit of what the show had already established to be. But you can definitely tell that the first season almost was like a testing ground for them, and after they saw the success of the first season, they decided, let's double down on this and really make this a really strong show. And the second season is definitely where this show begins its journey on becoming one of the greatest Star Wars things to ever exist, one of the biggest and most beloved Star Wars things that has ever been put to screen. Honestly, I don't know who I would be without the Clone Wars today. I grew up with the Clone Wars. I was watching it as I was growing up, while it was on TV, and I've rewatched it countless times, and it's really awesome to see the beloved fan base that's behind this. This show has really gone on to become one of the biggest pieces to Star Wars canon. Some of the characters in this have become huge fan favorites, and some of the moments in this show have really inspired so much storytelling in comics and books, and even was the reason that we got shows like Star Wars Rebels, and the fact that we have Dave Filoni that's still being a huge part of Star Wars, with even directing a few episodes of The Mandalorian. And so I look back at this show, and it's just really crazy to see how much it's expanded, especially from that first season and from that first movie, because the second season is really where it starts to pick up, and you start to get a lot more just fun, gritty adventures in Star Wars. Sure, throughout the entirety of the series, you're going to have a little bit more kid-friendly, just fun, silly episodes, but for the most part, you start to really get these fun episodes that really dive into the lore and what's going on in the Clone Wars overall. Another thing that I really love about the show is that they do not dumb down the dialogue. It really keeps to the dialogue that you hear in the prequels, as far as the political dialogue, and when they go to these different planets and systems and are trying to recruit them to the Republic or to the Separatists, they really do a great job of making sure that it's not dumbed down for kids. I can see a lot of kids watching this show and enjoying it for the action and the fun adventure, and obviously you're able to follow the narrative as a kid, no doubt, but there's so much there politically that is for adults that, as a kid, I loved the prequels, I loved the Clone Wars, but it wasn't until I was like 18, 19, a little getting older and starting to understand a little bit more about politics, because I was younger, I really didn't care about politics, and even though Star Wars played a big part into politics and I understood how they worked, there's so many underlying tones and themes and a lot of the dialogue that makes a lot more sense to me now as I'm getting older, and every time I go back and rewatch it, I just love and really appreciate the fact that they did not dumb down the dialogue for this show. This show definitely keeps to that dialogue that you should have in Star Wars for having a bigger understanding of what's going on in the galaxy on an overall, and that's one of my favorite things about this show, again, is that they did not dumb down the dialogue. And then on top of that, each season continually gets better. Like I said, I just had to kind of make that comment about the first season and how similar it is in a lot of ways to that first first movie, though I feel like the first season is a lot better than that first movie, but it's season 2 and on that really would become one of the most beautiful things that Star Wars has ever had. We have so many great characters that are developed, introduced, and characters that come back to life that we have seen from the films, that it's so awesome the way that they introduce them and really expand upon them in this. You know, some characters you may roll your eyes on, it's like, how did they come back? And I can only imagine that some of you already know who I'm talking about, but when you watch the show, they really do expand on it a lot, and you're so happy that they did do that. There's so much about this show that really expands Star Wars, really expands the prequels, and every time I watch the Clone Wars and go back and watch the prequels, I have so much more context that really expands those films for me. And I think if you're somebody who's not a huge fan of the prequels and that era overall, I highly recommend the Clone Wars, because I know so many people who felt that way. Maybe they didn't hate the prequels, or maybe they did hate the prequels, or maybe they just didn't really care for them all that much. But then when they got the chance to sit down and watch the Clone Wars, they found themselves truly in love with the series and truly in love with that era of Star Wars, and having a deeper understanding of what's going on in the galaxy at this time, and being able to have more time that develops characters like Count Dooku and General Grievous and Darth Maul and other characters that you see in those films that really aren't expanded upon. And I really do love the fact that they just dive deep into the lore in this. There's some stuff later on in the series that dives really deep into the Force and just how it all works, and the Jedi and the Sith, and there's so many things from the books and comics that are pulled into this that really just expand the lore overall, and I just love that so much. And on top of that, there is just so many really fun adventures. It's a really well written show. I said it in my review for the Clone Wars movie. Ahsoka Tano is definitely one of the most developed characters in all of Star Wars, and it's from that first movie onto where you see her at the end of this series. It's just absolutely awesome to see her character growth, and then being able to also see her character in Star Wars Rebels, and Clone Wars will be coming back to give us a good final season, because if you know nothing about the show, they kind of canceled it. It ended in a way where there is some level of finality where you could just leave it there. However, there is still open-ended elements that they really needed to expand upon. I was in the panel for Star Wars The Clone Wars back in April in Chicago for Star Wars Celebration. It was just so awesome to see the scenes with Ahsoka and just the overall scenes that they showed us that we're going to be bringing these characters back and giving us one final beautiful season. I'm so excited to see what they do with the Clone Wars and where they take this for this final season. And yeah, on an overall level, guys, I highly recommend the Clone Wars. I think that if you can get past that movie and you can get past some of the sillier episodes in the first season, just out of your love for Star Wars, even though the first season does have a lot of really great things, the second season and on really will become some of the greatest Star Wars I think that you've ever seen. There is just so much in there that is just so good. There's so much in there that really expands the prequel era, and I think that if you watch this, like almost anybody else who has, you have a different perspective on the prequels and just that entire era, and it really just does expand upon things in such a beautiful way, and I never get tired of watching this series in any way, shape, or form. And like I already mentioned, this series also spawned things like Star Wars Rebels and gave us Dave Filoni, who, if you know again nothing about him, when I talked about it in my review for the Clone Wars, Dave Filoni is essentially a god within Star Wars for people who are really deep into Star Wars. He is essentially George Lucas's protege, you know. The Clone Wars was the final big thing that George Lucas worked on in Star Wars, and he essentially passed down all of his knowledge to Dave Filoni, and Dave Filoni is just known in Star Wars to be essentially George Lucas 2.0 in a lot of ways, and I really just love what he's been able to do with the franchise since this series, because he really did prove himself as a showrunner for this show, and I really cannot wait to see what he does with the final season. I just love the Clone Wars so much, and I recently rewatched it with my girlfriend Haley because she had never seen it. She had seen the movies multiple times, and she was finally ready to dive deeper into Star Wars and the lore and understanding the world a lot more, and I think the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Resistance, and all these other supplemental Star Wars material that we've really gotten in the last few years, especially the cinematic stuff, has really just expanded Star Wars in such a beautiful way that the films just really can't. And I've already said it a couple times in here, but there's just so much about this series that expands the story, expands the lore, and really just gives you a deeper appreciation in retrospect of a lot of the things that happen in the film, and a lot of the things that maybe aren't expanded upon in the film that you're able to appreciate retrospectively because of this series. And I really just love the Clone Wars. So what do you guys think about this series? Leave those comments down below. Did you like this series? Do you not like this series? What is your favorite episode? I will be moving on now back to the movies with episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, so look out for that review really soon. Thank you guys again for watching. I really appreciate it. Go check out Star Wars The Clone Wars. If you have Disney Plus, I highly recommend going to check out Star Wars The Clone Wars. It is easily some of the best Star Wars ever put to screen that will really give you a different appreciation for Star Wars on an overall level. And I would find it really hard to believe if you didn't enjoy it more and more with each episode that you watch. So yeah, guys, leave those comments down below on your thoughts on this series, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!